On a quiet Sunday in May 1982, a teenager riding his lawnmower along a country road in southwest Ohio made a horrific discovery. It was the body of a man lying in a ditch, and he had been stripped down with signs that he had been beaten. This is the story of Perman Gilbert, a small-town true crime mystery that remains as baffling today as it was in 1982. Gilbert was a lifelong resident of rural southern Ohio, known as a devoted family man and a skilled handyman. He was married to his wife Joanne, and the couple had 4 children, with whom they lived on a farm near the village of Hammersville. The Gilberts were active in their church and community, and Perman had a reputation for being friendly, honest, and dependable. During the week, he worked as an appliance repair technician for a national company, and on Saturdays he took on independent service calls to earn extra income. One of Perman's passions was flying. He owned a small private plane and even maintained a makeshift landing strip on his property, taking to the skies whenever he could. And trust me when I say it, this is going to be important, so keep this in mind. By all appearances, Perman Gilbert's life was stable and lawful. Friends and family later stressed that he didn't engage in risky behavior or have obvious enemies. He was in many ways a regular, well-liked guy in a tiny town. Perman was also very close to his siblings, particularly his youngest brother, Vernon. Vernon Gilbert was 12 years younger and had gotten into trouble with the law on occasion, but Perman remained a supportive older brother. This familial loyalty would later become one angle that investigators examined when searching for a motive in this case. However, in general, nothing about Perman's background hinted at the kind of danger or criminal entanglements that would explain a violent slaying. Saturday, May 22, 1982, started out unremarkably for Perman Gilbert. He left home around 8:30 a.m. to spend the day making appliance repair calls, as he often did on weekends. Uncharacteristically, Perman had told Joanne that morning that he didn't want to go to work that day, a comment he didn't explain, but one that would later haunt his wife. Nonetheless, he set out on his route, which took him through several small Ohio towns to meet scheduled customers and fix their appliances. By around midday, with his jobs completed, Perman crossed the Simon-Kenton Bridge over the Ohio River into Maysville, Kentucky, apparently to run a few errands before going home. In Maysville, Perman was spotted at a local supermarket sometime around noon. He bought a pack of Cancer kazoos and chatted with the cashier, who later remembered Perman as his usual upbeat self. After leaving the grocery store, he walked next door to the flower shop and had a brief exchange that would later puzzle investigators. Perman asked the clerk, Donna Phipps, if a certain female employee was working that day. Donna told him that the person wasn't due in until 4 p.m. and offered to help him herself, but Perman declined. He said he wanted to order flowers and that the other employee, quote, knew what he wanted, so he would come back later. While the interaction was odd, nothing about Perman's demeanor seemed normal to the florist, and with that, he exited the shop. That fateful stop at the flower store was the last confirmed sighting of Perman Gilbert alive. Perman never made it home that afternoon, and he had told Joanne to expect him by 3 p.m., but that time came and went with no sign of him. By nightfall, worry began to set in, but Gilbert's family didn't immediately drive around looking for him. Joanne was alone with their youngest child and felt uneasy about venturing out in the dark, but she did begin phoning friends to ask if anyone had seen Perman. When midnight passed with no word, Joanne's fear spiked. Around 3 a.m., in the early hours of Sunday, May 23rd, she called the police to report her husband missing. There was little officers could do in the middle of the night, but they took the report. Friends and family could only wait anxiously as dawn broke, hoping Perman might turn up or call. Unfortunately, the next news they got was every family's worst nightmare. On the afternoon of May 23rd, roughly 36 hours after Perman was last seen, a teenager returning from lawn mowing came upon a ghastly scene on Swope Road in Clermont County. The teen spotted a man's body lying in a ditch alongside the road, and he raced off to get help. Police arriving at the rural location found that the victim had been beaten viciously and shot twice in the chest. Investigators noted some peculiar details about the state of the remains. There were no cloth fibers or remnants of clothing on the upper body or in the bullet wounds, indicating that Perman hadn't been wearing a shirt when he was shot. In fact, his body had been stripped of all clothing and personal effects. His wallet, his wristwatch, his tan cowboy boots, and the large personalized belt buckle he always wore were all gone. Whoever ended him had taken pains to remove anything that might quickly identify him or trace back to his life. Some speculated that leaving the victim in such a state was meant to humiliate the family. The autopsy would later reveal another chilling detail. Perman likely died no more than 10 hours before he was found, placing the time of death on Sunday morning. In other words, he may have been alive through Saturday night, held captive or in the company of the perpetrators for many hours before they finally executed him. In the days following the incident, authorities searched for Perman's missing vehicle. It turned up several days later, abandoned on an out-of-the-way gravel stretch of Ebenezer Road in neighboring Adams County. This was about 20 miles from where Perman's body had been dumped. Inside the van, nothing obvious was amiss, and his toolbox, spare parts, and supplies were still there. They did find unknown fingerprints and some unknown hair, which they thought may be left by the perp, but this couldn't be traced back to anyone at the time. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find out if this hair was preserved for later forensic testing. In the absence of immediate suspects or obvious motive, detectives began piecing together any clues from Perman's life that might explain why he was targeted. Early on, the investigation revolved around three main theories, each pointing to a very different potential motive. One line of inquiry involved Perman's side hobby of aviation, and a suspicious proposition he had reportedly received not long before his death. According to Joanne Gilbert, her husband had confided that some unsavory individuals approached him about using his plane to transport street pharmaceuticals. According to her, Perman flatly refused to get involved in anything illegal and was quite offended that they would even come to him with such an offer. In fact, he told his wife that he had threatened to call the authorities if those people kept bothering him about flying secret cargo. This raised a dark possibility that local traffickers had decided to eliminate Perman because he wouldn't play along. Perhaps they feared he would report them, or they wanted to make an example of someone who said no. However, despite this plausible motive, investigators could never find concrete evidence linking Perman's death to such an operation. A second theory centered on Perman's younger brother Vernon, and the possibility that Perman became entangled in something much bigger than himself. As I mentioned in the beginning of this segment, he was very close to Vernon. 3 months before the slaying, in February 1982, Vernon Gilbert had agreed to testify before a federal grand jury in Cincinnati. The twist was, he was a witness in an organized crime investigation. The proceedings were closed to the public, but Perman went with his brother to support him. He had to wait outside the courtroom during the grand jury proceedings since these are closed to the public. And for reasons that are about to become obvious, and to tip my own hand more than a little bit, I think this theory offers by far the best explanation of what happened. During those tense hours, Perman grew uneasy, and he later told friends that he felt he was being watched or followed by an unknown man around the courthouse. This retrospective recollection became highly significant after Perman's slaying. One hypothesis was that a criminal organization got wind of Vernon's cooperation with law enforcement and decided to send a deadly message. Perhaps mob-linked figures identified Perman at the courthouse and marked the Gilbert family for retribution. This could explain the humiliating condition his body was left in as well. An even more chilling idea is that they eliminated Perman simply to bait Vernon out. Vernon was in hiding due to his status as a witness against these organized crime figures. Under this theory, they may have hoped that Vernon would attend his brother's funeral and then use this as an opportunity to track him. If this was the plan, it failed, since Vernon didn't end up attending the funeral, precisely because he was warned by the authorities about this potential plan to draw him out. The third major theory put forward that the motive was personal, an illicit affair or jealous rage that led to the slaying. Perman's work often brought him into people's homes, sometimes when only a housewife or female family member was there. Some speculated that the charismatic handyman may have been laying pipe in addition to repairing piping. His stop at the flower shop in Maysville, specifically asking for a particular female employee, made some wonder if he was planning to send flowers to a secret lover. One rumor that circulated was that a jealous husband or boyfriend discovered Perman was seeing this woman and eliminated him. It's the kind of salacious theory that spreads quickly in a small town, but ultimately, there was no evidence to suggest this was the case. The cops thoroughly investigated this angle and found no evidence whatsoever that he was having an affair. By all accounts, Perman wasn't a handyman Casanova, and if he was laying down any pipe, it was in the literal rather than the figurative sense. To this day, no suspects have ever been officially named, and Perman Gilbert's family continues to hold out hope this mystery will one day be solved. Personally, though, I strongly suspect that this is organized crime related, and that there will unfortunately be no justice here at any point. Hey everyone, Jimmy here with a reminder to like and subscribe, and also click the share button and spread the love. Also, check out the podcast Lazy Chill True Crime by clicking the links in the description and following over there as well. Early one summer morning in 2009, on the quiet shores of Ross's Point Beach in northwest Ireland, a father and son on a jog made a chilling discovery. It was the body of a middle-aged man laying motionless on the sand. The man had no identification whatsoever. No wallet, no papers, and even the labels in his clothing had been carefully cut out, leaving no clues to his identity. Irish authorities arrived and quickly realized they had a baffling mystery on their hands. In most cases, when an unidentified person is found deceased, police eventually find solid clues to figure out who they are and notify relatives. Not so for the man who called himself Peter Bergman. Detectives soon discovered that a few days earlier, on June 12th, this unknown individual had checked into a Sligo hotel under that alias. He paid in cash and listed a fake address in Vienna, Austria. He was described as being in his late 50s with short gray hair and a thick German accent, neatly dressed and very polite. In fact, showing identification was supposed to be part of the check-in process, but Peter Bergman looked like a polite, upstanding individual, so this just flat out didn't happen. Investigators later pieced together much of the man's final days in Sligo, using surveillance footage and witness statements. On Friday, June 12, 2009, the unidentified man arrived in Sligo by bus from Derry in Northern Ireland. He took a taxi from the station and checked into the Sligo City Hotel for a 3-night stay, paying up front in cash. Using his alias, he gave a false Vienna address and was not asked for identification. Hotel staff noted that he had a German accent and kept to himself. And as any Simpsons fan knows, no one who speaks German could be a bad man. So obviously, there was no reason to do their due diligence. Over the next 3 days, Bergman maintained a low profile, but engaged in some curious behavior. Each day, hotel surveillance cameras caught him leaving with a purple plastic bag filled with unknown items and returning with it empty. Investigators believe he was gradually dumping his personal belongings in trash bins all around Sligo, carefully using different locations to ensure nothing would be recovered. He seemed to deliberately avoid surveillance when disposing of things, suggesting a well-planned effort to erase his past. On Saturday, June 13th, he visited the local post office to purchase airmail stamps. It's presumed he mailed out letters, perhaps final messages to someone, but if so, those letters have never been traced by police. That weekend, he was occasionally seen stepping out for a smoke or a meal alone, always polite but extremely distant. On Sunday, June 14th, the man took a taxi to Ross's Point, the scenic beach outside town, where his life would soon end. He asked the driver for a good place to swim, and at the beach, he got out, looked around briefly, then oddly decided to head straight back to town in the same taxi. It was as if he was scouting the beach for what he planned to do next. Monday, June 15th, was the mysterious stranger's last day alive. Shortly after 1 p.m., he checked out of the hotel, carrying only a black shoulder bag, his purple plastic bag, and a new medium-sized black suitcase. The small carry-on bag he'd arrived with was no longer with him, implying he had disposed of it somewhere throughout his stay. From the hotel, he walked to the bus station, and there he bought a coffee and a snack and was observed reading some notes on small scraps of paper. He then tore them up and threw the pieces into a garbage bin. Whatever information he wrote down, he clearly didn't want anyone else to see it, and these scraps were unsurprisingly never recovered. That afternoon, the man boarded a bus to Ross's Point Beach once again. Several beachgoers later remembered seeing him walking along the sand that day, a tall, gray-haired man in a dark jacket, politely greeting passers-by. He didn't seem distressed, and if anything, it was the exact opposite, like he had found some sort of profound peace. Witnesses recalled him smiling and nodding hello as he strolled the shore, looking generally upbeat. As evening fell and the beach emptied, he was last seen alive at approximately midnight, still alone by the water's edge. By the following dawn, the man only known as Peter Bergman was no longer amongst the realm of the living. At 6:45 a.m. on Tuesday, June 16, 2009, a local man and his son were jogging along Ross's Point when they found a body lying near the water's edge. It was the same stranger who had been seen around town, now deceased. He was dressed for a swim, wearing only beach attire, and some of his clothing was found on the shore, but there were no identification documents anywhere. Police noted that even the tags in his clothes had been cut out to conceal any origin clues. The man was officially pronounced dead at the scene, and the Irish police launched an intensive investigation to find out who he was and how he died. A post-mortem examination yielded more surprises. Despite his fit appearance in life, the man was in very poor health. He had advanced prostate cancer and multiple bone tumors, as well as signs of past heart problems. Yet, remarkably, toxicology tests found no trace of any medication in his system. He wasn't even taking painkillers, despite what must have been severe pain from his chronic conditions. As for his likely cause of death, it's not what you think, and I don't have to use some euphemism like unalived to talk about what happened next. The pathologist noted that there was no classic evidence of drowning in his lungs or airways. He had likely succumbed to cardiac arrest while entering into the cold sea or while on the shore of the beach. There were absolutely no signs of foul play or trauma. Investigators worked diligently to identify the dead man. They ran his fingerprints and DNA through international databases with no matches. They checked missing persons reports across Europe and beyond, but found nothing that fit his description. The address he had given at the hotel was as phony as his name, and after a 5-month investigation, authorities had the unknown man laid to rest in Sligo in an unmarked grave. In the end, the man who had gone to such pains to hide his identity succeeded, and he remained a mystery. Over the years, various theories have emerged to explain the enigma of Peter Bergman. Some are sensible, others quite far-fetched. The leading theory is that the man was terminally ill and chose to perish in a place where no one knew him. Knowing he didn't have long to live, he may have decided to slip away quietly, rather than letting his friends and family see his final painful days. The beautiful, secluded coast of Sligo could have seemed like a fitting spot for his final moments. In this scenario, every step he took, including disposing of his belongings and removing all labels, was to ensure that his death would leave no trail back to his past life. Perhaps he even hoped his body would drift out to sea and never be found, fully completing his disappearance. Another theory is that Peter Bergman was hiding from something or someone. The use of an alias, the deliberate erasing of his traces, and the secretive behavior suggest to some that he might have been a fugitive or a former spy trying to escape detection. This idea is, of course, extremely interesting, but there's just really nothing to suggest it whatsoever beyond the fact that his behavior was unusual. Peter Bergman is no Isdal woman, and the circumstances seem to suggest that this cowboy wasn't running from anyone other than himself. Even more outlandish speculations have also been floated, reflecting how baffling this case is. Some amateur sleuths pointed out his careful tactics and wondered if he had a military or law enforcement background. One particularly bizarre claim even suggested the entire case was a hoax, orchestrated by a filmmaker as a piece of performance art. In truth, no evidence has ever emerged for any of these exotic theories. My personal theory is that the man who used the name Peter Bergman deliberately engineered his disappearance, but he didn't want to leave those he cared about uninformed. The sequence of documented actions feels like the work of someone conducting a tidy, intentional exit after a period of pain and suffering. Those measures show planning and a desire to control the manner in which he would be known or unknown. They read to me as deliberate acts meant to separate the public facts of his death from the private communications he still intended to make. If he did send letters, as the purchase of airmail stamps suggests, those envelopes would serve as his chosen mechanism for confidential contact. Airmail implies international destinations, and the possibility that he wanted to reach people who lived far away without creating an electronic trail. Mailing handwritten messages would let him speak directly to selected recipients while avoiding traceable phone calls, emails, or digital footprints. The simultaneous act of shredding or tearing other notes in public fits a pattern. He wanted certain words to travel and everything else to be irretrievable. In short, he could have ensured that only those he trusted received explanation or farewell, while the wider world saw only a man with no identity. The puzzle of public silence, despite significant media coverage, becomes less mystifying on this reading. If the people who knew him had already been told and had agreed to honor his wishes, they might have chosen privacy over publicity. Thus, the absence of public identification doesn't necessarily mean no one knew him. It may actually mean the opposite, that those who knew him very well and chose to respect his wishes. At 9:30 on the morning of August 1st, 2012, the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange signaled the start of a normal trading day. But for Knight Capital, it was the start of a nightmare, so to speak. Knight was one of Wall Street's top market makers, handling roughly 17% of all American stock trading volume at the time. But first, let me take a moment to do a quick aside on what a market maker is and why they accounted for such a large portion of volume. A market maker is a company, or technically even a person, that's always ready to buy and sell a stock so other people can trade quickly. They make money from the small difference between the price they buy at and the price they sell at, while keeping the market moving smoothly. Market makers profit by buying a stock at a slightly lower price and then selling it at a slightly higher price, pocketing the difference called the spread. Because they trade absolutely huge volumes of shares every day, even tiny spreads add up to big profits over the course of a year. Further, because they conduct so many trades so rapidly, they rely on algorithms to conduct these transactions. With that said, let's get down to how this incident occurred. On that fateful Wednesday morning, Knight Capital's systems went on a buying spree. The firm's algorithms unexpectedly started flooding the market with orders across a broad range of stocks. In the span of roughly half an hour, Knight accumulated positions in 154 different stocks, totaling about 397 million shares. The automated programs didn't just buy, they bought and sold repeatedly at rapid-fire speeds, ignoring normal trading limits. Stocks that Knight normally helped make markets in were suddenly whipsawing in price due to the sheer volume of erroneous trades. By the time Knight's team realized the extent of the problem, the company had unintentionally acquired around $7 billion worth of securities. These positions were unplanned, a massive inventory of overpriced stocks that no one at Knight actually intended to buy. The firm was now stuck holding huge long positions in some stocks and short positions in others, all accumulated by accident. As the losses mounted with each unintended trade, Knight's management scrambled to contain the damage. It took 45 frantic minutes before Knight Capital finally hit the switch and shut down its trading to stop the bleeding, but by then, the damage was done. The firm's unplanned stock positions had to be unwound as quickly as possible to avoid even greater losses. Knight frantically sold off the trove of stocks it never meant to own. This was a task so large that Goldman Sachs stepped in to buy the entire pile of unwanted shares by the end of the day, but at a massive discount. Unloading that inventory came at a high price, and Knight ultimately lost around $440 million when the dust settled. In mere minutes, a glitch had pushed a powerhouse trading firm to the brink of bankruptcy. The story behind Knight's glitch turned out to be a perfect storm of lack of oversight, poor management, rushed changes, and failed safety checks. Investigators and insiders pieced together the chain of events that led to the disaster. A retired trading feature called PowerPeg had been dormant in Knight's software since 2001, but its code was never fully removed. And yeah, there's more than a little bit of humor in the name of that trading feature in my view. In 2012, Knight repurposed the old features of the algorithm, unknowingly reactivating some of the PowerPeg logic in unintentional ways. I suppose you could even say that the algorithm appears to have been unintentionally set to pegging Knight Capital, but I'll come back to intentionality in a moment. Knight's team rolled out the new software, but one of its servers failed to update and continued running the obsolete code. This out-of-sync server was a ticking time bomb within the system. When the market opened, the rogue server started generating massive erroneous orders based on the old logic. Transactions multiplied uncontrollably. Millions of shares were bought and sold within minutes, since the usual volume caps and fail-safes had been bypassed. The immediate aftermath of the Knight Capital glitch was as chaotic as the event itself. News of the incident spread fast, and Knight's stock price plunged by nearly 50% in a single day. On the verge of collapse, Knight was forced to seek an emergency lifeline. Just days later, a group of firms poured about $400 million into Knight to stabilize it, since the removal of this firm from the playing board would decrease market liquidity big time. This rescue kept Knight Capital afloat, but at a steep cost. The new investors took a majority ownership stake at a fire sale price, diluting existing shareholders. Knight had essentially saved itself by selling itself off in pieces. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched an investigation and later fined Knight Capital $12 million for failing to have adequate risk controls. According to the SEC, Knight violated the market access rule, which requires brokers to have safeguards to prevent these kinds of trading disasters. The SEC's report made it clear that Knight's systems lacked the basic checks that could have stopped the avalanche of bad trades. For Knight Capital itself, there was no returning to business as usual. The firm limped on for only a few months with its reputation and capital badly damaged before it was fully taken over by one of the firms that had come to the rescue. Whenever a disaster of this scale happens, people naturally wonder if there is more to the story. Knight's 2012 glitch was officially attributed to a series of mistakes and bad luck, a perfect storm of human error. But in the aftermath, some observers floated theories that the event might not have been entirely accidental. Some have speculated that the error in the code was intentionally placed there, perhaps by a competitor, in a cloak and dagger act of sabotage. Others have speculated that the error may have been inserted by a disgruntled employee or contractor to bring down this massive firm. More outlandish theories even suggest that the firm was taken out by a state actor, though the reasoning for this is unclear. These theories have essentially gained significant traction because they're interesting. However, the intentional glitch theory remains firmly in the realm of speculation. Most experts agree that Knight's own internal errors lit the fuse, and once the bomb went off, natural market forces did the rest. In essence, the real mystery is why there were no meaningful safeguards to prevent this event, a question which will likely never be answered. Imagine living in a time when money itself seemed to disappear from the face of the earth. In the mid-15th century, Europe experienced a severe shortage of precious metals so extreme that historians call it the Great Bullion Famine. Coins were the lifeblood of the medieval economy and were the basis for both trade and taxes. And unlike today, when central banks can simply print fiat currency, medieval governments had no such option. When the silver and gold ran out, so did the money supply. As these resources grew scarce, markets faltered, wages went unpaid in real currency, and everyone from merchants to kings found their treasuries running dry. The bullion famine was the result of a perfect storm of economic imbalance, geopolitical turmoil, and technological limits. One major factor was Europe's trade deficit with the Eastern world. Late medieval Europeans had a voracious appetite for spices, silk, and other luxuries from the Middle East and Asia. To pay for these imports, Western merchants sent huge quantities of silver coin eastward. Over time, bullion flowed out of Europe faster than it came in. This might have been sustainable if European mines could ramp up production to replace the lost silver and gold, but by the 1400s, many of those mines were in decline. Easily accessible veins were exhausted, and miners struggled to dig deeper with the era's limited technology. The famous silver mines of Bohemia, for example, produced only a fraction of their former output by the 15th century. Plague, various conflicts, and loss of territory to outside powers compounded the problem. The Black Plague in the 14th century had devastated Europe's population, including the mining workforce. Then ongoing conflicts, like the 100 Years' War in Western Europe and conflicts in the Balkans, disrupted trade and drained treasuries. In the East, The expanding Ottoman Empire seized control of rich Balkan silver mines, cutting off a source that once fed European mints. Even the stream of gold from West Africa, once brought into Europe via trans-Saharan trade routes, had dwindled by the 15th century, removing another traditional source of bullion. By the 1450s, Europe was at the height of the squeeze. More silver was leaving than could be replaced, and gold was equally scarce. People at the time grasped for explanations. Many blamed hoarding, the idea that merchants were hiding away coins and not spending them. Indeed, uncertainty may have led some to stuff their coffers. But hoarding was only a minor piece of the puzzle. The real roots of the crisis lay in those bigger forces, a continent spending its money abroad while its mines ran dry amid plague and conflict. The bullion famine had dramatic consequences for trade, labor, and governance. Commerce slowed to a crawl due to this lack of cash. Without enough silver and gold currency in circulation, buying and selling became difficult, and more transactions resorted to inefficient barter systems. The crisis also hit the workforce. Employers found it hard to pay wages in real money, and workers grew frustrated receiving pay in kind, such as food or cloth. In England, it became so bad that in 1464, King Edward IV decreed cloth workers must be paid in, quote, true and lawful money, rather than in goods. Even so, complaints continued, since often there was simply no silver available to pay artisans and laborers. Many people effectively fell back into a barter economy for daily life. Governments struggled to function as their treasuries thinned. Kingdoms needed coins to pay soldiers, equip ships, and administer justice. As bullion dried up, mints from England to Florence slowed or halted production. Some rulers resorted to debasement, the process of mixing less precious metal into coins to stretch the supply. This tactic allowed more coins to be minted from the same bullion, but it led to inflation and public distrust, since each coin contained less precious metal. By the mid-15th century, much of Europe was mired in an economic slump, and social unrest flared as communities struggled under the strain. Still, a few financial hubs weathered the storm better than others. For example, the trading cities of the Low Countries used sophisticated credit networks and alternative currencies to keep commerce moving even when silver was scarce. Solving the bullion famine took effort, innovation, and global exploration. One remedy was to boost mining output at home. The urgent need for metal drove technical progress in European mining. By the mid-1400s, miners had introduced new pumps and equipment to dig deeper into exhausted mines. This led to fresh discoveries or better yields in Central Europe, where rich silver veins were tapped in the 1450s and beyond. Those new mines didn't flood the market overnight, but they gradually increased Europe's coin supply and eased the worst shortages. Another remedy was to find bullion abroad. Portugal's explorers played a key role here. Portuguese ships sailed down the West African coast in the 15th century seeking gold. By the 1440s, they began bringing back African gold from trading posts on the Guinea coast. This African gold was a lifeline, allowing mints to strike more coins and keep commerce alive. Further, in 1498, Vasco da Gama's expedition opened a sea route to India. This gave Europeans direct access to Asian markets and reduced the need to pay for Eastern goods with Europe's remaining silver by cutting out most of the people in the middle. The most dramatic turning point came with the Age of Discovery. The search for precious metals, amongst other goods, drove explorers like Christopher Columbus to venture across the Atlantic. Columbus's 1492 voyage, though intended to find Asia, led to the European encounter with the Americas. Within a few decades, the Spanish were sending shiploads of treasure back home. By the 1530s, Silver from rich mines in the Americas was pouring into Europe. This flood of new wealth decisively ended the bullion famine. By the mid 16th century, Europe had a far more plentiful money supply than before, marking the transition to a new economic era. Ironically, Europe then faced yet another problem: bullion fueled inflation in the 1500s. This crisis left a lasting mark on how Europeans handled money and trade. The scarcity of coin forced people to innovate with credit and banking, helping plant some of the early seeds of capitalism. With not enough metal money to go around, merchants and financiers had to rely more on letters of credit, bills of exchange, and other forms of paper promise. Italian banking houses in places like Florence and Venice were at the forefront of this financial adaptation. They developed sophisticated accounting systems to keep track of transactions without immediate cash, effectively creating money on the books. This wider use of credit and trust helped keep commerce afloat and demonstrated the power of banking networks.